Now, what's our capacity to carve out a space in which some of these processes might be problematized or contested? The dominant framework is a social democratic response, one that tends to be based on a single narrative of decline of the public sphere and a single logic that drives it, marketization. And the response is this: to restate the state. Now, this is a conception that views the public sphere as spatially and temporally fixed, clearly marked from the passions and pleasures of the personal, and that misses the gender subtext of the duality between public and private. Indeed, David Marquand, one of the most prolific writers on the death of the public, has said, if the personal is politicized, or the political personalized, the public and private domains are both likely to be twisted out of shape. And this twisting is what people like me struggle to make happen. Right? So I'm a bit reluctant to go along with it. Right, so rather than retelling this story of social democratic decline, I want to argue for an approach that explores how notions of the public are being problematized, obscured, remade, and contested in the process of public service reform and modernization. And I want to do this by tracing how such questions have shaped and directed my own work over the last decade. Now, I want at this point to apologize to anybody in the room with whom I've collaborated on a research project that I'm going to talk about, because trying to do 10 years in 10 minutes is going to not deliver the full richness of whatever we worked on. But the first thing that I want to talk about is an early ESRC project that I was engaged in the ESRC's Whitehall programme with Sue Richards, who's here somewhere, which was a study of the introduction of market testing into the civil service. And one of the things I brought away from that project was that concepts such as economy, efficiency, and accountability, and those are concepts that structure decisions about what services should be externalized, have to be understood as social constructs whose meaning is struggled over. It taught me, in other words, never to believe the figures. But that process of social construction and meaning making have very significant consequences, not only on the distribution of resources between public and private sectors, but also on the formation of the identities of those engaged in the transformation of the public sector, whether that's turning bureaucrats and professionals into entrepreneurial managers, or whether it's about bringing commercial, third sector and community organisations into new forms of governmental power through the contracting process. Market testing, then, was a process that obscured the clarity of the boundary between public and private. That is, it not only externalized some services, but also brought the logic of the market deep inside those that remained public. And that's a process that's continued with later initiatives, best value, purchaser-provider splits, public-private partnerships, and so on. The fractured and plural public domain produced by marketisation and other reforms opened up the space for managerialism. And through the 80s and 90s, the pattern of my research and teaching led me to develop an interest in the impact of managerialism. And that culminated in the book, The Managerial State, written with my long-time collaborator and partner, John Clark, who's forbidden me to do a public thanks here. Nevertheless, it's well due. This book explores the dynamics of dispersal and coordination. That is, it traced how the dispersal of state power under Thatcherism was only possible because of the significance of managerialism as a logic of decision-making and coordinative rationality. And I think that idea of this dispersal of power is quite important to hang on to as we see further processes of dispersal with the establishment of foundation hospitals and so on. And we need to look at what logics are guiding decision-making across those fragmented set of institutions. I then went on to analyse ways in which power is being reconfigured under New Labour, exploring the contradictions at the heart of the third way, and how such contradictions produce tensions that were played out in public policy and in Labour's agenda for public service reform. Tensions between the drive for centralisation and the delegation of power, tensions between vertical lines of accounting and reporting and target setting and the requirement to deliver joined up government and partnership. So, I mean, I don't need to talk you through those because most of you in the room have lived them in one way or another. But my interest has been in how managers and staff and policy actors occupy the spaces created as those tensions are played out. And this leads me to a theme that I've called making up managers. When I left local government in the mid-80s to do a PhD, I began teaching and researching with the Women in Work programme at Aston. And our work with senior women managers there taught me the importance of identifying what happens in the spaces created when traditional commitments and affiliations to local communities, to service users, to staff, encountered new managerial ideologies of delegation and empowerment. And looking back, what we were doing was working with such women to find ways in which older forms of politics, including but not exclusively feminist politics, could be articulated with those new political rationalities. And this kind of commitment, inflected through different forms of politics, continued in my work at Inaugural at Birmingham with people like Chris Skelcher, who's here, and other Birmingham colleagues. And my work has focused on the importance of studying those experiences and expectations and a commitment to theory building as a collaborative process with research subjects. And this takes us back to the question of who do managers and policy actors think they are. And just a little episode I want to tell you about that delivered these quotes, which I'm not going to read aloud, but the context for this was a leadership program that I was running with Sue here, Sue Richards. And we were discussing with very senior managers, there you are, not there, very senior managers from different public services, the complexity of their work, you know, the impossibility of their job with so many different stakeholders wanting so many different things, so many contradictory targets, so many different values to work to. And so I asked them in groups to think about what were the principles that guide their decision making in the face of that complexity. And these are little extracts from some of the work that was produced. And I think what I want you to notice is how positive they all are, you know, and how value-driven they all are. Now, I don't want to romanticise public service professionals and managers as the sole defenders of publicness in the face of a malevolent policy agenda. It is, after all, through their agency that governmental power is enacted and managerial power embedded. But I do want to highlight their role in managing the contradictory logics of reform and of going one step beyond as researchers, statements that say the policy is saying this, it's all terrible because it means that. There's lots and lots of things that need to be studied ethnographically and collaboratively about what actually happens as policy is lived and experienced. And I think what these demonstrate is how actors negotiate the tension between business accountability and a wider sense of cultural or ethical responsibility. And that's a dilemma that hits those of us in the room who are academics as well, when we're trying to make judgments about how far just to respond to the market, of what the market is telling us to deliver, and what we feel in terms of ethical and pedagogic values we should be teaching. Okay, the next two projects marked a shift from a focus on public services to a focus on publics, and these are some of the issues that I've been looking at in two collaborative research projects over the last few years. One in the ESRC's Democracy and Participation Programme with Marion Barnes and Helen Sullivan studied deliberative forums. Now, these were new sites of engagement between public sector and other kinds of institutions and publics. So things like area committees, service user consultation groups, senior citizens forums, gay and lesbian liaison panels set up by the police, local management groups of Sure Start and so on. All linked to a new politics of user empowerment or community participation. And the current project at the Open University, Creating Citizen Consumers, Changing Relationships and Identifications, with John Clark, Louise Westmoreland, Nick Smith and Elizabeth Fiddler. And that one's looking at how policies on consumerism and choice are being shaped, the patterns of institutional adaptation and user response across three services, health, social care and policing, in two sites.